Sing another hymn, another song.
Σε ποιο μένεις, πού μένεις, ποιο μένεις.
Εδώ δίπλα.
Είσαι στο κοντινό στο...
Convention. Εσείς.
Είχα μείνει το ακούς.
Σε πολιτική που θα είμαι εδώ. Δεν ξέρω.
Το εστία... Europa πρέπει. Έτσι και έτσι το πει...
Στο περάσου. Όσα λες, αργότερα. Ring a bell, they think they're going to church.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm currently serving as the General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches. I'm Jørgen Skov Sørensen. I'm here to moderate this afternoon, which is the first session of keynote speakers. We got 4, as you will know. We're waiting for our first keynote speaker. I'm told that she is in the house, but I'm not quite sure how close she is to the black box. So we'll give her a few more minutes, and then she'll be here. Okay? If anyone fancies singing, I'm open to that, but I'm not initiating it. Okay? Thank you.
Speak from there.
Yeah, I guess.
Because I see they have mics here.
once again, welcome to this afternoon session. I would like to call upon the President of the Conference of European Churches, Christian Krieger, to introduce this afternoon's speaker. Thank you.
Yes, I have the great honor to welcome Mrs. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya here in the General Assembly of the Conference of European Churches. Let me briefly introduce you. Mrs. Sviatlana is national leader of Belarus, living nowadays in Lithuania. Mrs. Sviatlana's public story began when she entered the race after her husband, Sergei, is this the name? Tsikhanouskaya, was arrested for voicing his presidential aspiration. Lukashenko publicly dismissed her as a housewife, saying that a woman cannot become a president. Nonetheless, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya united successfully the lead of the democratic coalition in Belarus. Following her forced exile, Mrs. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya inspired unprecedented peaceful protest in Belarus with some rallies numbering of 100,000 of people. So far I'm informed. When the war has started in Ukraine, Mrs. Sviatlana announced the anti-war movement to prevent the participation of Belarus in the war against Ukraine. And she organized mass campaigns of disobedience. Of dozen acts of sabotage took place, aimed to stop Russian troops from entering Ukraine from Belarus territory. As the leader of the Belarus democratic movement, she has visited 28 countries, gathering support and advocating for the release of more than 1,500 of politician prisoners and the peaceful transition of power through free and fair elections in your country. In meeting with President Biden, Chancellor Merkel, President Macron, President von der Leyen, President Charles Michel, Prime Minister Trudeau, and other world leaders, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya emphasized the need for a braver response to the action of the Belarus dictatorship. In 2020 to 2023, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya became the symbol of a peaceful struggle for democracy and a strong female leadership. We are very pleased that you honor our General Assembly. Among dozens of distinctions, she is recipient of the Sakharov Prize Award by the European Parliament in 2022, I guess, and other international For Freedom Awards and Charlemagne Prize. And you are recognized by the Bloomberg's top 50 of the most influential people and by the Financial Times top 12 most influential women and political. We are pleased to have you with us, and we are honored to welcome you, and we look forward while you are speaking on the topic, what can churches offer in European society? She will deal with this topic from a political perspective. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
So, dear Reverend Krieger, Your Eminence Archbishop Nikitas, dear Professor Slote, dear Dr. Sorensen, esteemed delegates and participants of the General Assembly. On February 24, 2022, we all woke up in a nightmare. The Russian Federation launched a full-scale aggression against the Ukrainian nation, bombarding and invading them also from the territory of Belarus. One of the most surreal aspects of this invasion was the fact that it was claimed to be carried out in the name of brotherhood. In the fire of the Russian bombs falling on Ukrainian cities and killing Ukrainian civilians, the idea of the three brotherly nations received a mortal blow from those who promoted it. When empires speak of brotherhood, they tend to strangle lesser nations and countries in their brotherly hugs. I sincerely hope that my native Belarus will escape this ordeal. Genuine brotherhood must be a feeling among equals. It presupposes equality. True brotherhood doesn't seek to exploit or harm. True brotherhood is not abusive. It seeks empowerment and not domination. So, can this true brotherhood exist in today's world? In the Bible, the history of violence begins with fratricide, with the history of Cain and Abel. You may even argue that every violence, every murder, and every taking of life is, in a way, a fratricide. In the end, aren't we all brothers? Brotherhood is indeed a profoundly important concept for humanity. And one notable embodiment of this concept is found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Its opening article states, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood." And this declaration emerged from the painful lessons of World War II and the horrors of totalitarian regimes. It was a prophetic call to uphold the inherent worth and equality of every human being. In autumn 2020, when peaceful protests in Belarus were underway, Pope Francis published his remarkable encyclica Fratelli Tutti. He proposed a vision of a fraternal society in which the dignity of every person is acknowledged, respected, and honored. And a dream of such a fraternal society of solidarity was inspiring us in Belarus in our struggle against tyranny. In promoting democratic transformations, people of Belarus have chosen the path of non-violence against violence, love against hatred, creativity against brutality, solidarity against confrontation. Among other things, Belarusians' peaceful protests in 2020 were a manifestation of our firm belief in brotherhood and universal goodness of people. Traditionally, we speak about brotherhood, but what about sisters and sisterhood? Belarusian philosopher Olga Shparaga called the 2020 protests in Belarus revolution with female face. Women played an important and visible role in those events, and today many of them carry on the burden of suffering for Belarus. Maria Kolesnikova, Polina Sharenda-Panasiuk, Katerina Andreeva, Volga Zolotarь, Daria Losik. These are just few names of approximately 200 women jailed by the regime. Many of them are practicing Christians. And being a mother and a wife of a political prisoner is not an easy burden either. I know it because my husband Sergei is a political prisoner too. and I haven't heard from him for more than 3 months. Every story of Belarusian political prisoner is heartbreaking in its own way. One of them is the story of the Rizanovich family. Orthodox priest Sergei Rizanovich, his wife Lyubov, what means love in our language, and their son Pavel were arrested as terrorists for giving shelter to the opposition activist Nikolai Avtuhovich. All three were morally and physically tortured by the police. The 58-year-old Lyubov was proclaimed especially dangerous and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Her husband was given 16 years, and her son 19 years in prison. In 2020, Belarusian women in white became synonymous with the movement itself, symbolizing purity and non-violence. It is worth nothing that on the streets many Orthodox women in those days were holding icons. The Roman Catholic bishop Yuri Kosabutsky from Minsk compared Belarusian women with Mary, who stood by the cross without fear and looked at the suffering of her son. You took the flowers, you came out, you stood, you showed the world which confused all people. Your smiles, you just amazed everyone. Everyone was in shock. You came out and you have started defeating evil with good. You may have defeated the evil without knowing it. Our Belarusian girls, women, our daughters, sisters, wives, mothers, grandmothers, you are heroes of our time. You know, back then in 2020, for a couple of days, it seemed that the peaceful revolution had already won. For a certain period of time, violence stopped. Many people perceived it as a true miracle. The feeling of the real unity of the nation was in the air. Orthodox Archbishop Artemy Kishchenko of Grodno said that love returned peace and stopped violence. It became a healing force from the toxins of evil and aggression. The idea of brotherhood and solidarity took the form of a famous slogan, Belarus, Belarusu, Belarus. We can translate it as a Belarusian is Belarusian to another Belarusian. And this formula is a paraphrase of a famous Latin dictum, Homo homini homo. The author of this slogan was Witold Ashurak, the Roman Catholic from Lida. When in September 2020, the regime was arresting him, he was just returning from a prayer, holding a rosary in his hand. So rosary, prayer, and faith were his only weapons against the violence of the state. So were they not powerful enough to protect him, protect us from evil? In 2021, Witold died in jail. The day of his death, 21st of May, is the International Day of Solidarity with Belarusian political prisoners. Witold was 50 years old, and many believe that his death was actually an extrajudicial murder. He was killed by people who rejected his appeal to brotherhood. You know, Belarusian protesters in 2020 didn't dehumanize their opponents, and they didn't expect to be dehumanized by the police either. They thought, We are their brothers and sisters. How can they get violent against us? In the end, our demands are legitimate. Our hearts are open. Our intentions are peaceful. How can you beat that? But the regime did. The absolute evil did. For flowers, we got bullets and batons. For love, hatred. With the unprecedented violence against unarmed, defenseless people in cuffs, Lukashenko's henchmen tried to beat the very idea of brotherhood out of Belarusians' heads. And the evil seemed to retain its power. Unsuccessful attempts to provide democratic transformation resulted in complete destruction of civil society, rule of law, last resort of freedom. With the beginning of the war against our neighbor Ukraine, Belarus sank even into a deeper darkness of mass repressions, oppression, and terror. After the beginning of the full-scale war in February 22, Belarusians again went to the streets to peacefully protest against the war. They were detained and severely beaten for that. People in Belarus started to be arrested not only for pro-democracy and anti-regime position, but also for the anti-war position. However, Belarusians have been criticized for the peaceful character of their protests. For many, they were not brave enough, too weak to resist evil. And of course, I can't agree with this criticism. On the contrary, Belarusians performed miracles of personal courage and moral strength. Why? The answer is simple. We just truly believe in justice, law, morality, and conscience. And the role of people of faith in this firm conviction is crucial. A number of priests of all denominations were and are an important part of the Belarusian freedom movement. It is truly remarkable, as it is not always the case in the modern world. Repressive regime always try to control people of faith through oppression, manipulations, and sometimes even through privileges, buying the loyalty of the church leaders. The dictatorships try to silence church leaders or even to receive their approval and justification for the crimes. And sadly, they often succeed. As the Orthodox Archbishop Artemy of Grodno put it in his letter to Patriarch Kirill 2 years ago, our lay people are more decent and honest than all of us bishops who perhaps have long forgotten what people of faith should act like. Archbishop Artemy was one of those bishops who didn't forget it. In 2020, his voice against violence in support of just and legitimate demands of Belarusian people played a significant role. He also supported priests and lay people of his diocese who voiced their position against dictatorship and against the war. But in many other places, the church leadership added to persecution. Archbishop Artemy himself experienced injustice and lies from his brothers. They took the decision to forcefully retire him from his office on the pretext of his poor physical health. But the true reason was his public position. Trapped by his own church, he passed away on this Easter. When, in 2020, leaders of Belarusian churches raised their voice against violence and dictatorship, authoritarian ruler Lukashenko stated that churches are not for politics and threatened those church leaders. You know, when the policy of state is based on violence against its citizens, it shouldn't be surprised that those whose very profession is to preach brotherly love and non-violence become objects of repression. For the moment, we know the names of at least 16 Roman Catholic, 12 Protestants, 11 Orthodox, and 6 Greek Catholic priests who experienced persecution since 2020. They were detained, imprisoned, fined, threatened, tortured by the regime. Many became refugees. Today we know the names of 1,500 political prisoners in Belarus. The real number is estimated to be about 4,000. On average, 10 people are arrested daily. What for? Sometimes just for wearing socks of wrong colors associated with protests, or for liking an anti-war post on social media. In today's Belarus, this is enough to be proclaimed an extremist and to risk a prison term. You know, violence feeds on itself. Once begun, it's hard to stop. The repressions are systematic, however absurd this dictatorial system is. On the one hand, dictatorships rely on violence and coercion, military power and manipulation. On the other hand, they prove to be full of fear. They exercise violence because they are themselves threatened by people's aspirations for justice and peace, by courage, by solidarity, and by readiness to stand in the faith. You know, when we speak of profanation of such notions as brotherhood, we shouldn't forget that the dictators like Putin and Lukashenko are champions in this field. Care becomes a mask for abusive control. Protection of traditional values covers human rights violation. Like social justice disguises excessive engagement of the state in all domains of social life. And violent pacification stands for genuine peace. Dictators are often not satisfied with power over their own countries. They have delusions about their global mission. Dictatorships prove to be dangerous not only for the people in the country under their control, but also for the neighboring countries, for the whole region and even continent. For almost 30 years, Belarus has been a non-nuclear country. In an unprecedented gesture of humanity, it gave up its nuclear power in the name of peace of the region and the whole world. But today, the dictator brings the nuclear weapons back to Belarus. In case there is a threat to his personal security and power, he will not hesitate to use them, as he said 2 days ago. He is happy to have a death instrument in his hand, and he is ready to spread death around him, even if it means putting his own countrymen under strike. It's especially tragic in Belarus, as our nation is a Chernobyl survivor. I myself is a Chernobyl kid, and we remember what the nuclear catastrophe meant for the environment and for the people's health. But the dictators don't care. For them, people are just resources. If they don't care for people's lives, how would they care for air, water, or nature? You know, as I speak, all this is being destroyed in Ukraine by the war. 2 days ago, a Ukrainian Orthodox priest, 72 years, Mykola Palahniuk from Kherson region, was killed by a Russian missile right in his church. He was distributing a humanitarian aid to those affected by the flood which happened after Russians blew the Novokakhovka Dam. His church was damaged too. This tragedy shows how the Russian aggressor, together with the puppet regime in Minsk, is taking human lives and destroying spiritual, moral, and cultural values, at once destroying the material and natural ones. By their very nature, dictatorships represent a threat to political and social systems, to ecology, security, morality, truth, freedom, justice, peace, and also to human dignity and life. The full-scale war which Ukrainian people heroically resist their occupation and defend their country by military means again raised the question, are non-violent means of resisting domestic and foreign tyranny valid? Can we still believe in non-violence in the world where the might mean genocide of the weak and vulnerable? Can we still allow ourselves to stay non-violent where our neighbors, our loved ones are tortured and murdered? Isn't this utopia and naivety that you can speak with evil the language of love and good, answering to the bullets by flowers? What Christianity has to say on this matter? In November 2020, I responded to the encyclical of Pope Francis Fratelli Tutti with a letter in which I asked His Holiness how we could implement his vision of fraternal society in real life. And I still believe that this question is not outdated. You can't win the war without winning peace. A military victory will not be enough without political victory. And political victory, to be viable and long-term, has to be a moral one too. And moral, at least in the Christian world, means non-violent. It lays a burden of responsibility on religious communities, ecumenical organizations, and interfaith platforms. Are they capable of maintaining their genuine identity and providing a positive contribution to justice and peace in the society, guarding human dignity and freedom? I truly believe that the voice of the religious community is meaningful and important. It can be liberating, empowering, healing the wounds, moving the world to reconciliation and unity. It must uncover lies and manipulations of those in power who misuse religious concepts to reach their immoral goals. Religious communities, churches, and individual Christians can play a significant role in promoting peace in the society, maintaining hope under tyranny, and contributing to democratic transformations. People whose faith teaches them not to kill, not to steal, not to be a false witness, who honor God more than political leaders, whose moral strength is empowered by their belief, are extremely dangerous to dictatorship and extremely needed in democracies. Today, people of faith in Belarus need help from their Christian brothers and sisters from Europe and the whole world. The international religious community can do a lot for them. So, demanding access to religious services for those in prison, campaigning for their release, organizing pilgrimages and public prayers for Belarus, supporting Belarusian Christians abroad, calling leaders of Belarusian churches to dialogue. All this would make a real difference to Belarusians. And it is a pity that none of the Belarusian churches has membership in the Conference of European Churches. Perhaps it is time to try to change that, as Belarus is Europe, and Christianity is a genuine part of our identity. I would like to finish my speech today with another reference of my letter to Pope Francis. I asked His Holiness to pray for Belarus and its people. And this is what I ask of you today. Dear friends, please pray for those who suffer, for our political prisoners. Pray for Belarusian people and their liberation from tyranny. Pray for Ukrainian people, their freedom and safety. Give your helping hand to your Christian brothers and sisters who stand up for truth. Don't hesitate to raise your voices for true peace, true brotherhood, and true love. Thank you for attention. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think you noticed how deeply impressive this was for all of us. Now we'll follow two respondents, and I am privileged to call for the first respondent, Archbishop Nikitas of Thyatira and Great Britain, who will speak first, and after you will speak Professor Pamela Slaughter. But first, Archbishop, please.
Your Excellency, esteemed colleagues, sisters, and brothers in Christ, and if anyone should not be Christian here, dear people of God, I wish to begin this brief response by expressing not only my words of gratitude and support for Her Excellency, for her comments and her words, but also for her courage and her bravery. The bravery and courage to stand up when it is necessary to defend truth, a sacred value that is the very heart of her personhood, and I might dare say at the very heart of Keck. For the Church of Christ is that dynamic force which stands up against evil and defends truth, justice, and honor. We've gathered here, my beloved sisters and brothers, representatives from across the face of Europe, to enter into dialogue and to search our hearts as to how we will move forward as the members of Christ's body. We're here to look at our past and to think of our future. And I know we must move forward in unity and in solidarity, with hope in our hearts, as we labor for the causes of truth and justice. It is not the justice of the world and those of our societies. Rather, we seek and promote the justice of God and the truth of Jesus Christ. For our God desires that all people should be saved and come to the knowledge of His truth. And now that the face of Europe is changing, not only in its religious identity, but also in its cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and so many other aspects of its character, it is up to us as churches and as Christians to contribute and shape the path this continent will take through our leadership and our participation in all aspects of life. It is time for a new breath to come and awaken a sleeping European continent. This is the time for us to stand up with the same courage and determination as Her Excellency. As we heard earlier in her words, the desire to see oppression stop and the God-given rights of freedom and self-determination to be embraced and lived without fear. I am reminded of the prophecy of Ezekiel, the valley of the dry bones. We read in the book of Ezekiel, "The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He got me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, and the bones were very dry. He asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' And I said, 'Sovereign Lord, you alone know.' Then he said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to the bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord.' Perhaps the time has come, people of God, to receive the sacred breath of life once again. For the dry bones of Europe need to be resurrected and to come to life. It is time for the bones to reconnect and for them to rise up from the slumber of sleep and stand as soldiers, not only to defend truth, but also to give light to the darkness that seems to have overshadowed the Son of Righteousness and his message of peace and love. The church is called to rise up from its sleep and proclaim the message of salvation to all the peoples of Europe. Perhaps we need to recall and sing the words from another famous hymn, "Onward, Christian Soldiers." There are those who bravely stand up at times, but fear forces them and others to remain silent. For the consequences of their words and their actions mean nothing less than imprisonment, torture, and even death, as we hear in Belarus and in other places. There are those in our days and times who claim to be Christians and speak of war as if Christianity and violence are compatible. The only battle, though, for Christians is the one against sin and injustice. We, as the followers and disciples of Christ, must defend the weak and the innocent, as one body and in one voice, not as scattered groups and dispersed individuals. Here we stand today as equal partners and in solidarity, not in judgment or condemnation of one another, as to how we see and live our Christian faith. We now must come together and work as one body to put things back in order, to stop the abuse of creation, to end modern slavery and all forms of human trafficking, to call and act for all ways to stop war, to demand the respect for borders and sovereignty, and share what we have with those who have less through the resources of our wealth and the gains that we hide and hold in our treasuries. Remember the parable of the Last Judgment and the account each of us will give. Will we not also be accountable as a family of Christian communities and as KEC? If we wish to confess Christ as love, then we must live Christ as love. Where Christ is, there is no fear, for perfect love casts out fear, as we hear in the first epistle of John. We need to see the world through his eyes, the eyes of love, and not the blurred vision that seems, as we have it, take hold of us. When we leave this assembly, let us not go to our churches and our homes and leave the mandates on paper. Let them resound in our hearts and minds until they become real and alive in the very heart of European society. Stand up, people of God, and say no to aggression and violence, especially against the people of Ukraine and the surrounding areas, and wherever similar situations exist. Sadly, our leaders have not come to understand that there is no gain and profit in death and destruction. What our world needs now is only one thing: holy people, holy Christian people who live Christ. For these people will teach us by example and lead us on the path of truth, righteousness, and love. May we walk then together and be one voice, one mind, one heart, a united conference of European churches, determined to contribute and mold the future of Europe and the world. And if I may go off script for just one moment, the name Sviatlana is the equivalent to photini in Greek, which is the word having to do with light and illumination. This photini, Sviatlana, brings us the light and the truth of what is happening. If we allow that light to go out, we will give account to Jesus Christ for our indifference, our inability to defend truth. And we are Christians, or claim to be, and let us do what is right, and let us do what is true. May God bless you all, and may bless you and guard you and keep you in health and in safety, along with your family, along with all the political prisoners, but along with all the people who seek justice and righteousness throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence, for these strong words. I call upon Professor Pamela Slaughter for another response, please.
Your Excellency, dear sisters and brothers in Christ, dear people of God. First of all, I feel very honored to have been invited to comment on this important keynote, and more generally on the theme of what churches have to offer in European society. And I also feel very humble doing so. So just a few remarks. Churches have a long history of engagement with political and social processes in Europe. They have historically felt a call to raise their voices and act in ways that they have deemed to be the responsible way of responding to current challenges. So there is nothing new here. Neither is there, unfortunately, anything new in the fact of Europe facing challenges and crises, or indeed being at war. Political violence in various forms, including totalitarian violence, has affected the development of the idea of Europe and modern European identity. It has taken different forms and been justified in different ways, including theologically in history for purposes of criticizing and limiting excesses of violence. And of course, also outright non-violence has been one theological position. Some would say that contemporary discourse related to political violence has been secularized and legalized. And I imagine that part of what we do at this General Synod, but also KEK is working for otherwise, is reflecting on political violence and non-violence from theological perspectives. Now, a colleague of mine recently stated that today's global order is utterly inegalitarian, and that Europe, as part of this order, is an evil place. You might say that this clashes with the talk of European values, of human rights and democracy, of freedom and the rule of law. But the thing is that there is not just one Europe. It really depends on who you ask and how they are positioned and what Europe they have encountered. The Europe in the upper echelons of Brussels, or the Europe in EU-sponsored detention centers on the African continent. European border violence. What Europe is as a geographical space is disputed in part, and we are experiencing that today. We talk of Europe of mutual solidarity, and we have a narrative of a social Europe. But we also have a Europe of austerity and fiscal responsibility, and an idea of the European Union as being about saving economies, not people primarily. And there are competing definitions of what we are seeing and what we should want as far as European integration is concerned. We have national opposition to the European project of integration, and a call for some levels of disintegration as well. There is talk of a Europe as a peace project, including peace through commerce. And also importantly, Europe is not the same as the European Union. And it's important to keep this in mind when we're thinking about how to act as churches. So there has never been a single narrative of Europe. There has always been multi-vocality. We can talk of Europes in the plural, just like we can talk of futures or visions of the future in the plural, and different ideological structures guide and restrict these projections of the future. And from this multivocality follows several things, including that churches have as much space to raise their voice and articulate and put forward their visions of Europe as anyone else. And importantly, as churches, we are acting out Europe. As European churches, we embody Europe in the plurality. And we need to stay self-critical and reflect on which Europes we communicate and what politics we practice. Whose visions of Europe is it that the churches want to act on? It's not enough to say one's own vision. One must also relate critically to those visions of Europe's futures that are put forward by others. And here lies a challenge, because there are many, and they do contradict each other. For example, there's a need to critically assess the way Christianity and by these churches are being inscribed in new right-wing histories of Europe, or as pointed out in the keynote, used by repressing regimes. I also think there's a need to critically assess the official narrative of European leaders, and perhaps also in various ways to deprioritize parts of them. For example, when it comes to migration, in the Maastricht Treaty, that was lumped together with crime protection. And that context set a tone that churches might not want to tap into. So a quick question is, whom churches want to work for their vision of Europe? As in order to have a strong voice, churches cannot do it alone. And to effect real change, you need also to include the grassroots. Non-violence is a mass movement for social change, and it's the politics of ordinary people, including people of faith, to relate back to the keynote address we just heard. You also need to include a global perspective, indeed a planetary perspective, whenever thinking about Europe's and European futures. Just like the perspective has to be intergenerational and trans-temporal. And it has to include perspectives of the ones who are being marginalized as Europe's others and suffering European violence, including those on the way to Europe right now and others who are already here. Indeed, and with this I want to conclude, we need the multivocality in and beyond the churches in order to build up European solidarity, sister and brotherhood. We need to avoid single, simplified stories, single definitions of what Europe is and who are part of this Europe, as those usually build stereotypes and easily become tools of exclusion, of dehumanization, and result in aggressive violence and persecution of the kind we are currently witnessing in Ukraine and Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Slotte. So now we've had a keynote speech. We've had two respondents speaking. Now we have been given the generous opportunity to ask a few questions from the floor. And our main speaker, Your Excellency, will respond to the questions from the floor. Our speaker needs to leave at the latest 10 minutes past 5. So it's less than 15 minutes we have. I suggest we collect 3 questions from the floor, and that you, Your Excellency, that you respond to all 3 questions in one go. So, I invite people present here in the plenary to ask questions or to formulate questions. And if you have a question, please go to the microphones. We have 4 microphones situated, 2 over here and 2 over there. Our president can also ask a question, I think. Christian Krieger, if you wish to ask a question, you are welcome to do so.
Yeah, you raised the horizon of the Church of Belarus to become a member of KEC. This is probably a difficult horizon, but I wonder how you see, from your perspective, also the opportunity of your country to change to a more democratic country. How do you see the opportunities today?
You know, for 3 years we are fighting against dictatorship in Belarus, but I still feel and see the energy inside the Belarusian people who really want better future for their children, who want their children not to see terror and tyranny from the future government of Belarus. And I really believe that with the strength of Belarusian people, with the support and assistance of democratic world, with assistance of church, global church, you know, we'll be able to achieve success and win our country back, to build new Belarus where democracy prevail. So it's our obligation of Belarusian people, you know, to fight in Belarus, but help of the world will make this path easier and with less victims.
Thank you. I see there's a question from microphone number 3, please. Please remember to say who you are and which church you represent.
I'm Franka Riesmeijer from the Mennonite Church in the Netherlands. I want to thank you very much for your talk and also the respondents. It was amazing. You talked about the people being more, you used another word, but more pious than some of the church leaders. You have an audience of church leaders. How would you want us to use our power? Because you talked about what we can do in prayer, but we also have a lot of power in this room. How can we use that?
You know, honestly, time to time, you know, during these 3 years of our resistance, and when people in Belarus see how regime can blackmail church, you know, that they make priests to serve not to people but to the regime. I often hear that people start saying that we believe in God, but we stop believing in institution of church. So I really want this global church to show that you have power, that you have right and have tools to help our Christian people in Belarus. When you show that you can demand access to our political prisoners, that you can campaign for release of people from prisons, especially those who in so-called humanitarian list. We have hundreds of people with cancer, with diabetes, with heart attacks in prison, and we can't do anything with this. And I call people of church, to demand release at least of these people, furthermore, but, to demand at least this. If you can organize public prayers for Belarusian people, if you, as I said in my speech, can call leaders of Belarusian church to dialogue, if you show your openness, the church really powerful tool and instrument to solve humanitarian crisis in countries, it will be the best contribution, to our uprising, to our revolution for democratic changes. I really want Belarusian people to return their belief in church as institutions. So, because it's really, powerful to have this belief. It's belief, faith, unite people, and actually a lot of people in prisons now stopped relying on organizations or on people. They rely only on God. They are being tortured, they are being humiliated constantly, physically, and the only hope they have is their prayers to God. And you know that many people in prisons are trying to commit suicide because of unbearable conditions in prisons, and those people who are deep believers, they know that it's a sin to commit suicide, and they can bear all this inhuman treatment in prison only thanks to their belief to God.
Thank you, and I see a question emerging at microphone 4. Please remember to say your name and where you come from.
Thank you. My name is Ulas Tankler. I'm from Estonia, the United Methodist Church. First of all, thank you very much. I was deeply moved by what you shared. Thank you for coming. My question may not be an easy one. I'm wondering, how do you feel? Does it look like that so much attention that Western Europe has on Ukraine takes away the needed attention on Belarus? And what can be done that the situations in these two countries, very different situations, would not be played against each other, as you need support, as Ukraine needs support? Thank you.
Of course, we see that all the focus of the international community is on Ukraine, but we fully support this because we Belarusians realize how the fate of Ukraine and fate of Belarus are interconnected. We see that Russian empire doesn't see no Belarus, no Ukraine as separate independent states who have right to decide their future by themselves. And that's why we are facing the same enemy, the same imperialistic ambitions of Russia, and we have to keep together. We in Belarus realize that there will be no free, independent, sovereign, democratic Belarus without free Ukraine, but also vice versa. Without free and independent Belarus, there will be no peace and security in the whole region. So our fate are intertwined. Belarus is part of this crisis, and this crisis should be solved in complex. So I see how Belarusian people are supporting Ukraine. People sacrifice their freedom, just to support Ukraine as much as we can. A person, a young guy in Belarus, he donated 20 euros to Ukrainian army. He got 6 years in jail. Young lady was singing Ukrainian song, 2 years in jail. Our partisans in Belarus who sabotaged railway to slow down Russian equipment going through Belarus to Ukraine, they get now from 25 years to death penalty. You know, that's why it's also our obligation to help Ukrainians as much as we can. But simultaneously, we don't have to forget about Belarus. We don't have to leave Belarus for one day later. So now we'll deal with Ukraine and then we will return to Belarus. It will be too late. We already see the signs of creeping occupation of Belarus by Russia. And possible deployment of nuclear weapon is one more step to anchor the presence of Russia in Belarus for years and years ahead. And that's why we are alarming, we urging the world to pay attention to this. Just look at this from the point of view of Belarusians. We don't want to be under the sphere of influence of Russia. We are a European country and we are part of European family of countries. So show Belarusian people that we are welcomed in this European family of countries, that there is a European perspective for us. So we have to help Ukraine as much as we can. We always promote, just give Ukraine everything they need just to win this fight, because they are not fighting only for their piece of land. They're fighting for, actually for all of us, for democratic values. And, but also don't overlook Belarus, because now we face double crisis. Humanitarian crisis inside the country and geopolitical crisis, you know, threat to our independence. So we always say, stand with Ukraine and stand with Belarus. Thank you.
We got very few minutes left, so if it's a very brief question, we can take this one, and then a response, and then we close this session. Thank you.
I'm Victoria Lalak. I'm a Salvation Army International, but originally from Moldova. So thank you very much for your speech, dear Sviatlana, if I can say like that. My heart is fully with you, and I understand everything. And I'm just was moved by all the stories about our brothers and sisters in Belarus, and thinking about Belarus, and thinking about almost the same, if not worse, situation in Russia. Russia is not presented as Belarus is here. And I was thinking about all the stories you told us today. We need these stories, we need the source for our praise and for our activity, to be prompt and to be united. And that's why we need Belarusian refugees, bishops, and all the servants of God who are out of Belarus now, to be united them as well, and to be a part maybe of KEK, and to hear the stories and to know what to pray about. It's not maybe a question, but just a call to be united as us here, as well as all Belarusian priests and all Belarusian spiritual leaders who are already out of Belarus, and just to be informed what is happening, to inform our people, to inform our churches, to do something. Thank you.
Thank you for your proposal. I fully agree with you that Belarusian voice has to be heard in all the spheres of life, and we have many priests who had to flee Belarus because of repressions. Now they are serving mostly in Poland and Lithuania, and if you will invite them on all the possible fora, conferences where the questions of Christianity and church are being discussed, we will be really grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you. A very brief last word from our President.
Yeah, I want just to thank you once again for visiting our General Assembly. You moved us very deeply, and with your courage, with the way you stand up for truth, for justice, for peace, for democracy in your country, with all the people doing that with you. The next president of the Conference of European Churches is sitting in this room somewhere, and he will have a protocol visit to the President of the European Parliament and to the President of the Commission. I'm sure he will witness how we are moved by your witness today. That's what I want to share with you. Thank you.
May I ask everyone to keep seated while Her Excellency is leaving the room? I think there is a couple of gifts to be given first. Thank you very much. And I think we have set a good example this afternoon with brief, sharp questions. We will keep that up for the rest of the assembly, I'm sure. I have a few domestic remarks to make before we make a move for the opening worship of this assembly. I would like to welcome and thank the interpreters that we have amongst us in the two boxes down there. They play an essential role as translators, not unlike what we try to do in the Conference of European Churches, translating the message. Remember to speak not too fast when you make your remarks from the floor or when you give your addresses or whatever you do here, so that the interpreters can follow and interpret to those who would like it in a different language. Thank you. Then I should remind you, or maybe not remind you, I should simply tell you that at the dinner tonight, it's important that you keep the seat allocated for you. I believe you will find your name at a table somewhere. It's usually that way of methodology. That's due to some dietary requirements of some of you, so it's all being planned. It has all been planned. So please find your seat and keep that seat while we enjoy our evening together. We will now move to the opening worship of this assembly. I think most of you will walk. Everything you will see is within walking distance in Tallinn. It's very nice. And I know that there will be stewards showing the way. If you look into that corner, you will see at least one steward with a sign. So if you move that way and follow some of the stewards, that will take you to the church where we will have our opening worship. That's St. John's Church, Jaani Kirik. Then we will see one another under the arches in a few moments. That is at 6 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you very much.